love triangle is a common trope found in films of all kinds, from romantic comedies to dramas to shiny vampire movies. The triangle is nearly always comprised of two men who are infatuated with a woman. When director Luca Guadagnino received the script for Challengers by screenwriter Justin Kuritzkis, the tennis film's triangle fell largely within those bounds. Guadagnino, in making the film his own, wanted something a bit more outside the box. He wanted a love triangle in which all the sides touch. The undisputed top of Challenger's triangle is Tashi, played by Zendaya, with her two white boys, Art and Patrick, played by Mike Feist and Josh O'Connor respectively, rounding out this tangled triad. All three met when they were young, up-and-coming tennis players. Tashi quickly on her way to singles greatness, and Art and Patrick trying to break out of their successful run as doubles partners. It is during that sexually charged initial meeting in which all the sides of this triangle truly touch. While the two boarding school friends are certainly competitive over their desire for Tashi, Art and Patrick's friendship cannot be read as purely platonic. As Guadagnino shows us throughout the film, there is a queer desire between the two men bubbling beneath the surface that neither can fully acknowledge. Patrick initially gets the upper hand in their competition over Tashi, but as she sees success in her college playing career and he travels on the professional circuit, they start to grow apart. Helped along by Art's scheming, they break up in dramatic fashion. When Tashi suffers a debilitating injury that ends her playing career, it is Art that is there to comfort her. The two eventually marry, and she becomes his coach, placing her hopes of tennis greatness in him. Years later, when Tashi enters Art into a small challenger series to build confidence after his own injury, they find their estranged third Patrick across the net, and they both must confront the desire that has inextricably linked them all together. Are we still talking about tennis? This is a repeated question throughout Challengers, and the answer is always yes and no. It's reflected brilliantly in Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's transcendent house score, which almost exclusively underlines not the tennis action, but the contentious and spicy conversations these characters have. As Tashi says early in the film, tennis is more than just a game. It is a relationship. So while Challengers is certainly an incredibly erotic film, there isn't a ton of actual sex that we see. The eroticism comes through tennis. It's reminiscent of old Hollywood romantic comedies, which were limited in the sexual content that they could show, but found ways to evoke eroticism. While Guadagnino is obviously not bound by such restrictions, he clearly understands how sensual it can be to hide the ball a bit and create a sense of flirtatious foreplay within these conversations purportedly about tennis. It reminded me of the 1940 classic The Philadelphia Story, which also stars an equally ferocious threesome. Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, and James Stewart, was directed by a gay man, George Cukor, and uses the divorce of Hepburn and Grant's characters to skirt restrictions on extramarital relationships to create a love triangle film. Much like Art and Patrick in Challengers, Grant and Stewart's characters are similarly competitive over their affection for Hepburn's character. And though all sides don't officially touch, I read a slight bit of homoeroticism between Grant and Stewart at points. Challengers, free of restrictions, is a much steamier film that is far more blunt about its sexual content. But its main weapon, like The Philadelphia Story, is creative subterfuge, using its threesome's obsession with tennis to tease out the burning desire they have for one another. Guadagnino and Kuritzkis, through a masterfully constructed narrative that weaves back and forth across the timeline, use the pleasures of innuendo to craft a tremendously titillating experience that denies the audience release until the very end. Challengers is also incredibly funny, using its wit to both amplify the film's sensuality and ease the tension building between these characters. Like the trio in The Philadelphia Story, Zendaya, Feist, and O'Connor are given exquisite material to work with that demonstrates their comedic chops and lends further depth to their characters. While all three are quite funny, O'Connor gets the juiciest material as the bad boy Patrick. I love when actors can communicate specific character traits through discrete choices, and O'Connor does that here masterfully. Patrick thinks of himself as the consummate cool guy, constantly flashing a wry smile that projects a carefree confidence. But his often unkempt appearance suggests a man that is not entirely in control. He is ruled by his desires and the deep insatiable hunger inside him, which O'Connor expresses through an oral fixation, whether that be his persistent smoking or constant eating. Guadagnino also uses this fixation to tease out the film's homoerotic subtext, often having Patrick fixate on very phallic objects. Art is, by contrast, more clean-cut and projects a more demure image of himself to the world. Both in his relationship with Patrick and later with Tashi, he is content to follow their lead. Guadagnino even teases out this dynamic visually in the ways that Art interacts with Tashi as an almost maternal figure at times. Art is also less driven than Patrick and Tashi, which Reznor and Ross express in their theme for him, which is a far more laid-back techno motif than the higher-tempo driving beats that Patrick and Tashi get. By the time of his challenger match with Patrick, Art has certainly proven himself to be the more consistent tennis player, with the help of Tashi's coaching, but has never reached the heights of a US Open title. Guadagnino continuously shows us moments of Art's mind wandering away from the action at hand, whether that be a shot of him longingly looking at the sunlight streaming through a window before a match, an overhead shot of him lounging back in his chair during a break in play, or a moment where he gets lost in thought during a conversation with Tashi and his theme music kicks in. Art may be a great tennis player, but his passion is waning. The competition he truly cared about was the one for Tashi's affection, and though he can't admit it, he and Patrick were never better than when they had each other as foils. Feist communicates all of this brilliantly. Tashi is the true alpha of the trio, and Zendaya absolutely shines in the role. She lends the character movie star charisma, incredible style, and a layered emotional core that draws you in despite her more questionable qualities. While she shows unmistakable desire for both men, none of it matches her desire to, as she says, see some good effing tennis. She'd kill to have a recovery like Art's, she says at one point, speaking to the carefully concealed sense of loss she feels for never being able to prove her greatness as a professional. That sense of loss is channeled into her coaching career with Art, who she is trying to will toward greatness she could never achieve herself. Throughout the film, Guadagnino makes a point to highlight the wealthy boarding school background of her two white boys against the more humble, middle-class upbringing Tashi had. Instead of starting her professional career right away, she goes to college so she has a degree to fall back on. Her mother travels with them as a nanny to her daughter, even though she could afford paid help. This stark class divide is a source of her antipathy toward Patrick, who is struggling in self-imposed financial hardship despite having the world handed to him on a silver platter. Throughout her life, she has had to seize control for herself to get where she's wanted to go, and her injury took that completely out of her hands. So she clawed back control in her coaching career with Art. But as the film progresses, it becomes clear that she is conflicted. She appreciates the moldable clay that Art is, but resents how dispassionate he has become about his game. And she is reviled by Patrick's unearned confidence, but is drawn to his passion. Her heart is torn between these two men. That conflict of the heart is essentially what Challengers is about. Wrapped up in this heavily stylized story about three messy people is a radical idea about love and relationships. You can call it non-monogamy, you can call it polyamory, but whatever the term, these three characters are drawn to each other as a trio. While all three could certainly do with some therapy to find healthier ways of interacting, it is undeniable that each is worse off without the other two. While Challengers leaves the ultimate resolution of this triangle open-ended, it is ultimately a fun, layered examination of the full spectrum of love and attraction. What truly makes Challengers magnificent is that all of this is conveyed through a heart-pounding, blockbuster-level sports film that manages to make tennis as exciting as a boxing match. Guadagnino treats each tennis scene like kills in an action film, always trying to show the audience something new. The cinematography is incredibly inventive, balls flying past the camera left and right, zooming around the court, panning across it, going under it, and even getting the POV of the ball itself. It is stunningly kinetic, and that energy is not only reserved for the action scenes, as Challenger's real game is being played in the conversations these characters have. In these scenes as well, Guadagnino amplifies the emotion by resisting simple shot-reverse shot coverage and heightening the character dynamics with his motivated framing. In one argument between Art and Tashi, he even cuts the exchange to resemble a tennis match. With this exciting, colorful visual style, one of the greatest movie soundtracks I've ever heard, 3 tremendous central performances, and a perfectly constructed script, Challengers absolutely blew me away. I was lucky to see it twice in IMAX, and each time was an absolutely exhilarating experience. I'm giving Challengers an easy 5 out of 5 stars. It is currently available on VOD.